Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by complimenting the IIEA on a very, very worthwhile event. It's great to see so many stakeholders here today discussing what is a very, very important issue. It's a commercial issue, it's an exporting issue, it's a developing issue, and it's something I think, as we'll discuss as the day goes on, as something that needs to be embedded right across the process of the entire food and drink industry. I'm here on behalf of the food and drink industry, and I'm not going to repeat the statistics that have already been presented this morning, only to really stress that this industry is all about exports. We exist while we're competitive enough to outcompete those in other markets. Once we lose that ability to compete, once we lose our ability to export, and our industry dies. Export competitiveness is something, therefore, that has got to be at the forefront of all of our minds as we consider the policies around greenhouse gas emissions and the wider area of the climate change package. Let's focus on a few things in that, to make that point and to stress that point. The pertinent points are this. We're the largest exporter of food and drink products to the UK market. Dairy ingredients. We're the largest net exporter of dairy ingredients in Europe. We make around 12 to 13% of the world's powdered and infant formula. Beef. We're the largest net exporter of beef in the EU. And we're good at it. And that has meant that we've managed to attain the highest gross value add per employee in Europe. We're about exporting. And the challenge for us is to see how can we retain our export competitiveness while at the same time addressing and achieving the goals of climate change. And I think what I'd like to do in that regard is to focus on what we see as being the important aspect of climate change targets versus sustainability objectives. And there is a difference. Targets tend to be short-term in their nature. They can change. Every time one has a political agreement, the target can change. We're now dealing with a 20% target. In the event of a global agreement, we could be dealing with a 30% target. You need a very different strategy to address a 20% target to the strategy you'd adopt to address a 30% target. So targets tend to be more short-term. For us, the key issue for right across this industry should be a focus on the more long-term sustainability objectives. They're the investments in the future. Sustainability is the thing that one needs to focus on in terms of research, in terms of longer-term capital expenditure at company level, in terms of the investment of the development of markets. These are all long-term investments. And for that reason, a focus on sustainability is what really is required. And therefore, if we want to retain export competitive, then we need to make sure that we have sustainability enhancement programs embedded right across our entire food chain. But of course, the important thing is that you can't just deal with this in isolation. There's no point in a company starting up with a sustainability department and having a room set aside and saying everything to do with sustainability happens inside in this room. It's not. This is akin to food safety. And sustainability has to exist and across all of the facets of business, across every one of the activities, actions, investments of all of the business at all stages of the sector. In that way, we're looking at a more long-term and sustainable future for the sector. And the other point I'll make, and I will demonstrate later on, is that it's important that when you're looking at the food chain, if you have solo runs by individual sectors and individual parts and elements of the food chain, it sometimes can have a negative effect on the rest of the industry. I'll give you an example. If I was looking at, say, a concept such as shelf-ready packaging, a very good idea. It reduces the waste at one level of the chain. But in the transport element, it means you're running around with half-full trucks because of the requirements of those packaging. And that's what I mean, that you've got to take a whole and holistic view of the steps that you're taking that actually benefit the whole chain and does not just transfer the requirements and the responsibility of sustainability and of the adherence of climate change goals. It's not about transferring it down the chain and up the chain and getting you to a position whereby you're saying, well, I've done my bit, it's up to everybody else down there. That's not good enough. If it's sustainable, it should be something that benefits everybody along that whole food chain. And for that reason, it's very important that we align our climate change targets with these sustainable practices. In that way, we will create a sustainable industry and retain our export competitiveness. What I'm about to propose is something that we've spoken of at length We've spoken about this at a national level, at a European level, and at a global forum. And this is the importance of adopting a balance sheet approach. And a balance sheet approach that will focus in on good practices across your food chain. What do I mean by this? If you take for a moment a very, very general depiction of what the food chain is all about. If you begin at the end, the land utilization, this is the basis for our raw material production. The feed for our animals, direct food growth, the basis for our food production. It's got a lot of things to offer. It's a carbon sink, but it also has elements that we need to consider and we need to manage. Right through our animal husbandry, our transportation. Transportation, of course, can exist and does exist at each level of this pyramid. Food processing, primary processing, secondary processing, value add. Value add is important, and value add is all about bringing into bear the objectives of the Lisbon strategy, innovation, moving up the value chain, producing higher value goods and services out of this country. But of course, that has an energy requirement. And of course, there is a consequence of moving up that value chain. The retail environment, food consumption, our consumers, bringing them into the game. The consumer has a role to play in all of this. If we're going to be serious about this and do something that's going to be lasting, then we need to be doing something that can run right across that whole food chain. If, for example, if we look at, say, what a balance sheet would look like, let's start at one part of the chain. Let's look at, say, land utilization. And if we go back to the statistic that has already been vocalized this morning, our primary agriculture is responsible for around 44% of our non-emissions trading emissions. It's a significant amount. What are the drivers? Well, the drivers of that greenhouse gas emission is how we use the land, how we till it, how we plough it, how we manage it. The volume of fertilizer we put on that land, that's a driver. Our foraging types and our cropping. That's on the one side of the balance sheet. On the other side, of course, you've got to look at the sustainability enhancement programs that are already in place. We have a nitrates directive. It's not perfect. There's implementation issues around it, which are a source of great frustration. But nonetheless, the overall objective has worked in terms of reducing fertilizer usage. The forestation programs, aggressive increase in forestation in the country is on the other side of that balance sheet. REPs, modified tilling. John Geraghty will speak about later on today about different developments in the tilling, which can add to the improvements of greenhouse gas management. But that's the other side of your balance sheet. But in doing that, you need to then allow for other factors, relative profitability. We've already had the example, as Hayden referred to, whereby changes in profitability trigger a change in your land use. If we find, for example, that there's a long-term more favourable return on investment from dairying enterprises in Ireland in a quota-free environment, it's possible that that's going to compete with the land that's available for forestry. It needs to be factored in. The other thing we need to factor in is, what about the increased carbon sink effect of higher leaf crops? What about the maize? Is it better for us in terms of carbon sequestration to be growing maize than to be concentrating on pasture silage? How a balance sheet approach would work in this case is that you're looking at your greenhouse gas drivers, deducting from this your sustainability enhancement systems, and then you're adjusting that by the additional factors. And that works at every level of the food chain. Let's look at our animal husbandry. Enteric fermentation, the methane produced by our animals, it accounts for around 36% of all the methane produced in Europe. What are the drivers? The number of animals. The production systems to a lesser extent. The means that we can increase the efficiencies of these animals, and that in turn feeds into the emission per unit of production. If you look at where we're enhancing our sustainability, however, at present, well, we're increasing and improving our genetic potential. That, of course, is feeding into our feed conversion. It's feeding into the efficiency of these animals, the number of productive to non-productive animals at farm level. Look at the way we're managing our animals. Longer, better, more intense lactation periods. Improved nutrition and pasture management. These are all positives. These need to be allowed for. But you've got to allow for other factors. There's a potential for expansion now that the CAP is lifting the barriers and restriction on production. Milk quotas are gone. And so, as global food demand increases, there's a potential for countries such as Ireland that already have sustainable food production systems to chase that market and to grow food in a sustainable way. But that will mean an increase in production. And if that system is appropriate, if that system is sustainable, that should not be restricted. If we look at the next level, transportation, and again, as I'd stressed, it exists at every level of this pyramid. Around 20%, 27% of all Irish emissions are attributed to our transport systems. And the drivers here are, in the context of a food and drink industry, we have a huge number of small agricultural holdings. That's a driver. We have a lot of wheels on the road trying to facilitate that, moving product in for central processing. Speed to market is important. Our retail distribution systems are a factor. These are all drivers, but they're necessary elements of a food production system. It's even more diverse and more apparent in countries such as Italy and France, where you're dealing with a lot of smaller producers, regional producers. That's where you've got a big transport element feeding into the greenhouse gas contribution of the food that they're producing. But at the same time, we're already enhancing our sustainability in these areas. We're looking and working on areas such as new developments in transport. It can be as simple as a retraining of your drivers, retraining of your fleet, replacement of your fleet, the incorporation of renewable fuels in your fleet policies. Changes to refrigeration technologies, the F-gas regulation. Transportation and storage go hand in hand. F-gas regulation is already bringing us along the way in terms of improving our performance, in terms of our requirements and our targets for greenhouse gas. Again, though, we need to allow for factors such as innovation-led value added. If innovation means that we can produce more and higher value products here, it means that there will be an energy requirement. That energy requirement may be in the production of the food. It may be energy requirements in bringing in ingredients to facilitate the production of value-added products which we then export outwards. There's a consequence of that. Is it wrong that we increase production in that context? Is it wrong that we increase an energy requirement in that context? It isn't, of course. It's not, of course. What's important, though, is that that energy is being used in the most efficient and sustainable manner. The other element is that from a dairy context, if you look at the increased demand at consumer level for fresh products, there's an energy factor on all of that as well. You need to get products to market faster, you have a shorter shelf life. That has a consequence. Look at food processing. Emissions trading is a key factor in here. Only 35% of our food processors are involved in emissions trading. That is a factor. But if you look at your greenhouse gas drivers and all of this, I mean, if you're processing food, you're always heating, mixing, or cooling. That has an energy requirement and is a driver. But at the same time, we're enhancing sustainability. All of our food production plants are now IPPC licensed. What that actually means is that it has forced companies to put in place the best available technologies, clean, efficient technologies. And that is something that has brought us along a huge way along in terms of what's being required. But again, back in terms of the areas such as food innovation, that will have the energy requirement. The only thing that is not up for discussion, irrespective of targets, is food safety. We will never compromise food safety to save energy. At food consumption level, just a thought, and it's worth keeping in the back of our mind. If we think of fuel, if we think of petrol and diesel, we're measuring the greenhouse gas element of that at consumption level. It's when you buy your product and when you use your product. We don't do that in food. I'll park that, but it's worth considering. The drivers here, of course, are your production volumes. The more food you produce, the more greenhouse gas and energy you actually utilize in this. But you were already looking at sustainability enhancement through improvements in packaging technologies, minimization of preparation times. And the other thing as well is waste. We waste a huge amount of food, around 20% of food. And I think as people are being brought into this game, we're starting to see a consumer response where less and less food is being produced. Less food being wasted means less energy being wasted. So if we're looking at adopting a balance sheet approach, there's a couple of things that are required. It has to apply equally across the food chain. It's not about transferring the burden or the greenhouse gas emission from one part of the chain to another. It needs to be standardized right across the EU. We need to make sure everybody is comparing the same things. If a balance sheet means the creation of a carbon label or a carbon footprint, we better make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody's measuring the same things, because that's the only way we'll make progress. Similarly, if we're making an international agreement, that self-same methodology has got to be a key part of this. There's no point in us going forward and saying we're going to increase our target to 30% on the basis of a global agreement in principle. Unless you've got that international standard where everybody's agreeing to measure the same things, we're not really in the game of sustainable food production at a global level. And it has to be simple. There's no point in building an industry on an industry which is all about bureaucracy. This has got to add value. And if countries are out there and they're saying, we don't want to play the game, we do not want to be a part of global agreements, we don't want to be a part of climate change, tarify their products, put a tariff on these products coming into countries where we are doing these things. There should not be an opportunity for people that are not willing to get involved in this initiative to escape their obligations. A final word, and before I conclude, I just want to make a very, very quick reference to this. There are 35, but there are 35 significant food processors involved in emissions trading. Emissions trading is, the end game here is charging food processors, charging all participants for every ton of carbon they emit. That has huge competitive implications at national, European, and global level. The only thing here is that you need to consider here is what are the opt-outs. If you're energy intensive, you can get out of the scheme. The problem is that the opt-out rules are appropriate to a German smelter, for instance. Whatever way you turn figures around, you'll never make a food processor into a German smelter. We don't have that level of intensity. And just ask yourself this. If, as we have under the IPC directive, if we have companies running with the most efficient technology in their plants, the most efficient technologies that is actually available in the marketplace, why then should you fine that company for running it? There's a bit of a conflict in there which I think needs to be addressed at some stage. In conclusion, Chairman, it's imperative and important that we always retain our global competitiveness. The climate change targets have got to be aligned with longer-term sustainability objectives. It's not about the targets, it's about long-term sustainable targets. That's where we will get. If we get that sustainability, we then in time will be able to turn this thing around into being a competitive advantage. That's not going to happen today or tomorrow, that's a long-term objective. The balance sheet, as I discussed and set out, that is the appropriate approach that has to be standardised across the EU. That then needs to be standardised globally. The emissions trading and the exclusion of companies from that scheme, it's not appropriate and will not work for the food processing sector. And finally, what I would say is that we should not ever take actions or do anything that would lead to a turning away and a downsizing of a very, very sustainable model of food production. If we do this, we can all achieve the goals, as ambitious as they are. If we walk away from this and chase targets, then we're going to create some very, very grave problems. And the importance of the economic sustainability is the bit that will be lost. And that's when the real problems begin. Thank you very, very much.